Wider participation and vulnerability. In the module coming up next to it, we will be discussing the same theme of participation and vulnerability. Now, having looked at how the participants think, let's look at the context and let's look at how the languages were being used in this context. So, if we think about a number of institutions which somehow are accessed more than others by these participants, think about the banks. The question is, what is the language used by banks to connect with their clients? We think about those forms, bank opening forms. Yes, several of the bank opening forms were bilingual. The helpline that the banks have was also bilingual, but when we are saying bilingual, we are talking about Urdu and English. We are not talking about the regional language. So that would mean that the regional language had no place anywhere. So coming to English, the role of English, all documentation in English, all the detailed information about getting a loan in English, all the detailed information about car financing or getting loans or constructing your house or the penalties that would come with late payment of loans, all of that was English. That meant that if you did not know English, you depended on the person who would read out to you and tell you what the information in it was. And you had no means of counter-checking this information. Token numbers. Token numbers were called out always in English. So you might think, all right, what is the big deal? But it is when you think of this instance when this boy who had completed his education in Sindhi and knew his numbers in Sindhi only, sits in this bank and he kept on waiting for his number to be called. And he did not even realize that his number had been called because he had learned his numbers in Sindhi and not in English. So that becomes a problem. Think about airline tickets. Several of our working class also somehow make it to the Gulf. And the educated class, of course, is always traveling in one way or the other. So what is the language used by the airlines? Air ticket, in English, of course. There is this form you might have seen tucked in the seats, which is talking about how to use the belt, what are the things you need to do when you're sitting over there, how to react in terms of there's a disturbance in the flight. Well, those were bilingual, Urdu and English again. The reminders that you now get on your mobiles were also in English, but the English only, no Urdu. And therefore, all the information related to what do you do when you lose your baggage in English, what do you do if you if you miss your flight, how to get your money back, all in English. So again, limited information in Urdu only. Think about the hospitals. So people have to go to hospitals from time to time. There was a difference in how language was used in private and public hospitals in terms of signposting. So if you go to this elite hospital, all signposting is in English. Other hospitals who are more friendly, user-friendly, have information in Urdu and in English. And if you go to some, other hospitals, some public government-run hospitals have it only in Urdu. Now we're coming to the use of languages in terms of newspapers. Newspapers, consistent, we did a documentary analysis and we realized that the information that was given in English and Urdu dailies did overlap to a certain extent, but to only a certain extent. So the Urdu dailies or newspapers were more geared towards what was happening inside, had more gossips, related more to crime and details of those local crimes, while the English dailies were more related or geared towards an audience which had this international exposure. Lots of international news were in there. The jobs advertised in Urdu and English, if they were government jobs, they appeared in both. But in several instances, the jobs advertised in English dailies were those which would promise a higher salary, and there were lesser jobs advertised in your Urdu dailies. Pamphlets, if we look at health pamphlets, we picked up a few at different hospitals, and the information was given both in Urdu and English, but the information that was given in English was different from the information that was given in Urdu. In Urdu, it was more about the procedures that had to be followed. In English, it was more about the background of the disease, how important it was, and all those things. So it was almost like getting to different audiences. Signpostings on the roads really depended, the language depended on where you were. Were you in an elite area, or were you in an area of the city which was like lesser developed? So in elite areas, you had only in English, the signposting was only in English, and in other areas, you had it in Urdu. Coming to the political participation, the speeches usually given by the political leaders was in English, not in English, was in Urdu. Yes, sometimes political leaders might go in the interior and might have used some local language, but to our knowledge and in the urban areas, it was all in Urdu. Having said that, there was this first speech at the time of a president at the time when this data was collected, and this first speech in the parliament was in English. And you had this TV projection of one journalist stopping a rickshaw driver and asking him, "What do you think of the president's speech today at the parliament?" And the rickshaw driver said to him, "I don't know what he said, because he said it in English. I don't understand English." And he said, "But we are telling you what he said, and you must have heard what he said on the television channels. They give the news in Urdu." And he said, "This is what you are saying, but I don't know what the president himself said." So think of this. These people, even the poor people, are not fools. They understand there's a difference between listening to the people firsthand or looking at an interpretation. Coming back to the health sector, look at the literature that accompanies medicines. How much of it is in English, how much of it is in Urdu? Definitely the information in English is much more. And these counterindications, which are in English and not in Urdu with some medicines, would mean that people taking medicines, using them, and being able to read Urdu, or even when they have finished secondary school, but if they don't read English language, they will not be able to understand that this reaction has been from the medicine they have taken up. And this is so different from the linguistic reality of the multilingual Pakistan we live in, where English is known by just a fraction of people. Most of the people, a majority, millions and billions, actually know only Urdu or only local languages.